never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong.
Hey everyone, it's me, Rob, your DM and your best friend. And if you've been listening to Dungeon Master of None for a while, you probably know that we love Stitch Fix. And, you know, I'm sorry, everybody. I apologize.
Please, Rob. I thought I had been sucked into, like, the Negaverse, the mirror universe.
We're the Bizarro Adventure Zone. Hello, everyone.
Hi, it's Dungeon Master of None.
I'm Dungeon Master Rob.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt.
And yeah, today we're going to be talking... We're going to be wading into the discourse of actual play and Dungeons and Dragons podcast. We'll be, of course, talking about the Adventure Zone, specifically the most recent arc Graduation, which ended, I think it was like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And there's been some talk about it.
And we've done this before. We've done, I think, one of my favorite episodes that we've done is one where we did talking about Critical Role from the perspective of a dungeon master, what you can and cannot learn from watching the show. And I mean, we kind of want to do the same thing here. It's just a little different.
It's a little different. So we did do this before. Honestly, I'd like to do it more. There are a lot of actual play podcasts out there, and I think there's a lot that you can learn from the DMs. I also think that it's really cool. I mean, when we were growing up as dungeon masters, Matt, in the ancient days, the only way to learn how to DM was by playing in a game or just doing it. But now you have a lot of people to listen to or watch, which can really, like, it's a lot. You don't have to jump in like completely blind.
Right.
And I think that's really, really instructive.
And in the future, we'll be able to do it with, like, we'll be watching Jeff Goldblum play D&D and sort of go.
That's right. That's right.
You two head into dungeons. Wow.
Well, there it is.
Yeah.
The gelatinous cube.
What can you learn from Jeff Goldblum's
from
dry
Jeff Goldblum.
sense of humor?
But the Adventure Zone, if you're not familiar, and if you're not familiar, that's okay. Yeah. To be clear, Matt and I are not big McElroy heads. I know that they have a substantial following online. We are not a part of that, not for any like good or bad reason. They're not really like they're my thing.
We've done our homework though. I listened to a bunch of My Brother and Me, the original Adventure Zone game, and this new season for this episode.
We did our research, but just know that this is, if you're a big fan, I hope this is useful. If you're not, I think you should, if you're interested in learning about DMing, you should listen to the first episode of especially the most recent arc, Graduation, and we'll talk about why I think this is informative. But if you're not familiar, and don't feel bad because I wasn't until I started doing research for this, but the Adventure Zone is a podcast by the McElroy brothers and their father Clint McElroy. They have another podcast, which I think came first, which is My Brother and Me, where they make jokes and answer questions.
Yeah, it's like
funny.
Dear Prudie without the less sincere and lighter topics.
Right. And then in 2014, they decided to take their family D&D game and turn it into content. And they've been doing that for 7 years, and it's on the Maximum Fun network. I don't really know what Maximum Fun is aside from a vehicle for the McElroys content, but it's a network. And it's...
Actually, I mean, the Adventure Zone's fine. Personally, I would rather rewatch Kindred the Embraced, a World of Darkness TV show, which is coming back. They're bringing back World of Darkness. Paradox has sold off the TV rights. I'm excited for that. Anyway,
we had other news. Yeah, World of Darkness TV show. We'll see how it goes. Big question marks there. Yeah, so this is, and it's hard to find numbers on this, but the McElroys have said this is their most popular podcast and that it's somewhere in the hundreds of thousands of listens, maybe as many as 500,000 listens. Hard to be sure. It's very popular.
They have a lot of podcasts. I was looking into this.
Yeah.
There's like other podcasts that they're on. Each of the brothers has a wife. This sounds like a riddle. All right, Rob. One man has
There are
three
three
sons.
brothers.
There are three brothers.
And
Each
three
brother
wives.
has a
Yes.
wife. Each wife has a podcast. Now,
How many podcasts
are going to St.
And each
Ives.
brother is on one podcast of their own and their wife's podcast,
Yeah.
and an undetermined number. So, given the number of brothers and wives in podcasts, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of content. They have a lot of podcasts, and we'll get into this some more later. But broadly, their brand, their appeal, their aesthetic is that they're a bunch of brothers and they're funny together and they talk about their feelings and they make jokes and it's just good family fun.
Yeah.
Sort
And
of.
I will say, so as part of my homework for this, this podcast has been recommended to me by a lot of people to go back and listen to the original Adventure Zone. It starts off as a campaign of Lost Mines of Phandelver. It's very funny. It's very jokey. You can tell you get the appeal. Like this is like, man, I wish me and my brothers, which I don't have any brothers, but played D&D together with our dad, and they're hilarious. And the Griffin, one of the brothers, dungeon masters this game, and it goes from Lost Mines of Phandelver to a wacky, cosmology, multiverse spanning campaign, hopping around to the moon and other planes, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and they have a great rapport, and it's jokey, and there are a lot of like really good puns and quips, and I get the appeal. It's fun to listen to. They're charming. They have great chemistry.
I think it introduced. It was one of the more early actual plays. I think it really introduced.
It was before Critical Role.
Yeah.
Is something that a lot of people forget. Like it came out before the big one.
And I think it introduced a lot of people to D&D and role-playing games in general, since they're bringing an audience for just kind of a general comedy podcast to role-playing games. And since then, they've done a bunch of different campaigns using the Powered by the Apocalypse system, Monster of the Week, some one-shots, etc.
Yeah. So, with that in mind, here's a little disclaimer. Matt and I are probably going to be pretty critical of this, and especially of the most recent arc, which was DM'd by Travis McElroy. And we're not trying to hate on anybody. We're not trying to yuck anybody's yum. But given the size of this and the popularity of it, I think it's worth talking about. And there's also, I think, a lot to learn as a DM from what really didn't work with this arc. So if you're a big TAZ fan, that's okay. I think that we're not trying to stop you from being a fan. If you would prefer not to hear us talk about more substantive criticisms of Travis or of the podcast as a whole, we'll save those for the end.
Yeah.
This first half, 2/3 will be about the DMing, and we're going to try to keep it constructive because, again, I think there's a lot to learn here, and we want, and that's like sort of our focus, but there's also a lot of other things to say.
And I think this is kind of a good opportunity because so many actual plays, sometimes it's hard because the Dungeon Master is doing a lot of things right and very few things wrong. And, this one has some more major flaws. A lot of flaws that I feel like are common to Dungeons & Dragons and other role-playing games. You will recognize them from probably games you've run. I've recognized them from games I have run. And it's maybe even better for learning how to DM. It's like, thank you for showing us some things not to do, along with some things that worked okay.
If you're actually trying to get better and find actionable changes or things to implement, you're probably better off listening to a little bit of Graduation than you are of listening to Critical Role.
That being said, parts of it were a little painful to listen to.
Parts of it, I'm sorry. A lot of it was really painful to listen to. I'm sorry, listeners. If you like Adventure Zone,
I like it just fine. It's just, parts of this this season, Graduation, was it felt like being stuck in a D&D game back in high school. But it's things that we can learn from. So,
yeah.
Well, we can't salute ya, can't find a flag. If that don't suit ya, that's a drag. School's out for summer. School's out forever. School's been blown to pieces.
So, with that being said, I hope you find this interesting, instructive. I think there's a lot to learn. I did not listen to the whole season. I listened to key parts of it, so we're not going to talk about the whole thing, but there's also like about 1,000 things that I want to talk about in just the first 2 episodes, so it would not be possible. But if you have other thoughts,
I sunk myself
or concerns,
pretty deep, Rob.
ooh,
Yeah.
Matt, I respect your sacrifice.
Okay.
Thank you for doing that. I didn't have it in me. So,
All right, well, shall we? Let's deep dive into the Adventure Zone graduation from the perspective of the Dungeon Master and see what we can learn.
All right. So,
Where do you want to
Matt.
start with this guy? This
I guess
this
episode
beast
1, right?
of a season.
What do we want to say? Let's talk about the very beginning, right? So, you fire up graduation. You hear the dulcet tones of Travis McElroy describing school grounds, a magical school, and then those dulcet tones continue for several minutes while you are waiting for something to happen.
Yeah.
And then I believe the first thing that another McElroy says is like, "Oh, we can go now," or something like that.
This is a great example
Off
of
to us.
players that are definitely subtly giving you feedback on things. Here's, I think, a common mistake that new dungeon masters make. They do a great job of building a very interesting world full of cool things, and then they cannot wait to describe it to everyone else, right? One thing that you really want to avoid is giving yourself box text, right? It's the worst thing about published adventures, where you're like, all right, you're starting the campaign, here's 5 paragraphs to read aloud. Your goal, always, I think, at the beginning of basically every session of play, is to, as quickly as possible, stop talking.
This is the most important advice, I think, for the first session, is you want to
And
do
for every
an
session.
absolute, but especially the first, after if you do a session 0, but you want to give the bare minimum to set the scene and let the players play, because you will have time to give exposition and description, but you want your players to ask for that. So this is both a broad and a specific criticism, and I think this is a really like common rookie DM mistake. But yeah, Travis is constantly reading what is obviously pre-written. It is his homebrewed version of boxed text.
Yeah.
And it is so obviously different from everything else in the game. It is stilted. It just slams everything to a halt.
I think people will be like, well, if you're a new dungeon master, you're probably a little nervous, and that's completely understandable. And I think it's only logical for you to think, you know what, I'm going to do lots of prep. I'm going to write lots of things out. I know that when they get to location Y or person X, I can read through this scene, and that takes some anxiety away from me, knowing I have this prepared. And it's a nice instinct. It just doesn't work because it bores your players.
Right. And here's the thing. I actually do read boxed text. I read it all the time. However, I read it quickly, and I cut parts out of it, and I keep it brief. And if it's not relevant, I don't read it. So again, and this is a little unfair to Travis, because this is, I don't think, entirely his fault. But like, you can listen to Matt Mercer, and he's obviously reading sometimes pre-written, like a paragraph or two, and it sounds engaging. But Travis is not good at narration. Like this is not one of his strong suits as a dungeon master. and we'll talk about what some of his strong suits are, but like in the first episode, he does great voices. He's pretty good at like thinking on the fly, right? In conversation, but this is like very stilted. It's not very interesting, and it bores the players and the listeners. So it depends on who you are. Some DMs can read sort of like florid description and make it interesting, and others cannot.
I know
Matt,
I'm not one. Like, I have given lectures for money, but at my table with a group of people, I know that like I feel their interest waning immediately when I start doing narration. So I basically just don't do it.
I keep it very brief. This is a personal choice.
Right. There's no exact rule here, right?
But I think Matt's rule is more right than wrong. And 9 times out of 10, if you can get away with not reading any box text or not having any pre-written narration, you're better off for it. It's not as strong as organically describing. If you're reading a description, it's better off to sort of just like have like the bullet points and then read it naturally, or to improv as much as possible from your notes, right? And we'll talk about the structure of this because it is impossible to improvise everything, and we've talked about this a lot, but there's things you should improvise and there's some things that you should not. And I think one of the things that Travis does is he completely gets that backwards. He writes out everything that he should improvise, and he improvises everything that he should write out. And the first indication is with his narration. So
okay. Would it be okay,
back
Rob,
to the episode,
for me to give like my basic recap of what's going on here? Obviously, spoilers for the Adventure Zone graduation.
Yeah. So go. So I wanted to start with the very first thing we hear.
The very first thing.
But
it's rough when you come out with a big boner like that at the beginning of your campaign, but it's not. We've all done it. This is a new Dungeon
like
Master
an
thing.
Automatic fail, but it's not a great way to start. But give us a recap,
okay, so
a big picture thing.
There's a lot happens here, as in any Dungeons and Dragons game. And I'm going to try and keep it again as short as possible. Graduation is about heroes who are enrolled in a school for heroes and villains. It has a silly name. They are put in the school's annex for sidekicks. They do some regular adventures. They kind of, for the school, they find a secret like evil fraternity, and they discover that like there's an evil / not evil god / not god of order and chaos that wants to start a giant war to shake things up in this world, and then they go and fight them. There's a lot of personal side quests along the way, but the conceit is they're enrolled in hero / villain school.
So the immediate conceit is there, and it's clever. It's not like original, but it's funny, right?
Yeah,
they're at a
this is a good
hero
conceit.
and villain school, and they're sidekicks.
Now,
it's funny. It's a funny bit.
In one of their discussions, the McElroys talk about what would you do differently, and I think Travis is the one who says, the Dungeon Master, that I would maybe not do this conceit at the beginning, because he was sort of viewing this as it didn't work out so well, starting the players off in a magic school for adventurers. I would disagree. I think it's a just fine conceit. There are whole game systems set up for this conceit. Masks, for example, works perfectly in a superhero school, like Sky High or something like that.
I mean, okay, so
I think it's a fine conceit.
A lot of this I was gonna save for the end, because there's a recap episode that they do that we want to talk about in detail, where they reflect on it. But Matt, you bring up a bunch of good things. So
what do you think of? I just want to talk about the basic conceit. Is this a good idea for? Is there structural problems with this?
And so I agree that I would not set a D&D campaign in a school personally, because I would just not. I feel like that's more trouble than it's worth. That being said, by itself, it's not a bad conceit. It's actually a perfectly good setting for a game. Like Matt said, that there are actual systems that are designed around this exact thing.
I had a friend who was for a long time working on a campaign just called Dungeon Academy with this basic conceit. I would talk to him every week or two about it, and it's a great conceit for a campaign. One of the interesting things that the players discover almost immediately is that the monikers hero and villain for what's it called? Higglemoss's School of Heroes and Villains.
Hieronymus Wiggenstaff, isn't that it?
Wiggenstaff.
These are great names. I'm sorry. One of the things that Adventure Zone does do well is they have very, very funny names.
The names are funny, right? Hieronymus Wigglestaff's School for Heroics and Villainy. And they discover almost immediately in the first episode that heroes and villains in this world are kind of for show. It's kind of like pro wrestling, and it's all regulated by a heroic oversight guild. It's very it reminds me of the Venture Brothers, Rob. If you watch that show, it's like, oh, you sort of discover as you move on that this is an elaborate, highly regulated dance between heroes and villains, and that's kind of funny. And we're here, and this brings me to my next point of criticism. This conceit is not a bad conceit. How it's presented to the players drains it of its fun and excitement.
Right. So
this is the principle of showing versus telling.
I agree with this. And so the idea is a good one. It's both funny and interesting. And it's the foundation of a lot of like recent superhero sort of like, I don't know, I want to call them like postmodern, post-Watchmen superhero like properties, like really like take apart the idea or like make superheroes into, like a pro wrestling kayfabe kind of thing, which is, I think is a really terrific take on the whole superhero genre. But and I'm really sorry to be critical, I do not think that Travis McElroy has presented this the right way and has the sort of foundation or chops to pull this off. And I just don't think that he has read enough or like, I don't think he's familiar enough with, like, he's just like retreading. I don't know. It's a good idea, really poorly executed, and that's very frustrating to me.
And trying to be constructive here, let's talk about how it could have been executed better. The idea that like heroes and villains, that, you know, your heroic archmage and paladin are actually like later in the day they all go like fill out their forms with the heroic oversight guild and get paid, and then have drinks at the like the hero VFW with the villains is funny and interesting, and there's stuff you can do with that. However, it's all a problem of presentation, and this is a problem that new dungeon masters face all the time. The players are told just when like arriving at this hero school that, oh yeah, heroes and villains, you know, they just kind of, towns hire them to have fights, and it raises the profile of the city for like better commerce and making things interesting, and they're just told that. Now, imagine
this is something I wrote down, Matt. Like in the very first episode, I think it's like 20 or 30 minutes in, one of the players rolls a knowledge roll or asks, and then Travis just tells them all of this in like precise detail, and that was so frustrating to me because I was like, let them see it, right?
Imagine a world where they go and fight a villain and the villain is arrested, and then they later see them hanging out with the hero that they were sidekicking for, and they're like, what's going on here? And they're like, oh yeah, you're new. Okay, let's tell you about these things. Like, whoa, okay.
Right. Like, imagine that they like sidekick for a hero, and the hero turns out to be a fucking asshole.
Right.
And then they find out, oh wait, hero doesn't actually mean good guy.
Yeah.
It's
the
just
villain
like
is maybe a really nice guy, and he's like, oh, let me introduce you to my 3 daughters, and oh hi, how's it going? Yeah, I bring the kids sometimes.
and this is the thing, and this is one of like Travis's major failings, is he's clearly like so, and this is a big time new DM mistake. He's just so excited about the world that he created that he just wants to like do exposition and tell people about it. And it would be so like I just like basically lost interest in the first episode when he just like described it, because like I got what was happening. I was like, oh, I think I see what's happening, but I was sort of excited to see it sort of like rolled out. See the players discover this on their own.
Doesn't have to be so clever that your players can never guess it. It's okay if they guess it. The fun is the tension and then finding out, oh, my guess was right. But just being
Right,
told
and
immediately, it doesn't work.
I mean,
Show,
the fact
don't
that
tell.
the heroes and villainy, or it's a school for heroism and villainy or whatever, automatically tells you that like there's like that it's roles they're playing. You don't have to then just tell us exactly how the world works. I'm trying to be constructive in this first part, but that frustrated me so much because I was interested and I wanted to see it emerge, and then I was just like, here it is. And it's just like, well, what now? You know?
Two more examples, because this is something I have done, especially when I was a new dungeon master, right? Is that
yes. By the way, these are mistakes I have made as well. To be clear, everything that Travis does is something that a lot of DMs do. It's something I have done specifically. I'm going to tell you later why I don't think that's a good excuse. But, you know, it's a thing that happens often. But anyway, sorry, Matt, you were saying.
Oh, it's okay. Two examples. One, why does this really, really matter other than it's just not fun? Later on, we are told, I don't know, like 2/3 or like halfway through the season, that this setup of no real conflict is like bad because a god doesn't like it. We're told later that this is actually bad. And when we're told this is bad versus told this is good, like it does seem like kind of a good system. Like no one gets hurt, right? The Venture Brothers, like I love the Venture Brothers conceit, right? Because there's union regulations, and if a child's in danger, they're like, I call a timeout, and you stop the villain hero fighting, and we can make sure everyone gets proper medical treatment, right? That's endearing, right?
It's funny.
And then later on, we're told that this is actually bad, and it's causing like an imbalance in the like fabric of how order and chaos perceive the universe. But again, we're told it's bad instead of shown that this is having some kind of bad effect. So that's like why down the road you don't want to do this. Another smaller example that I think new dungeon masters can learn a lot from. When the players arrive at the school, and basically almost every episode, they meet a gargoyle or have a gargoyle named Gary. Garys are like the like robots of this school. They've got lots of information. They can help you out with things. They're robot butlers. And then they are immediately told, not by Gary, but by Travis the DM, oh, well, so the Garys are like, they're all like, they all have the same name, and they're all like a hive mind. They're all individual people, but they all like share, they all have the same knowledge. And this was just another example where if you could have just waited, if you could have waited to show your players this cool thing, the next time the players meet a gargoyle, they're like, oh, hey gargoyle, you kind of look like the one we met before, Gary. He's like, yeah, I know. So what's your name, gargoyle? It's Gary. Oh. And then later on, another episode, they're like, wait, you know what our Gary knows? Oh, yeah, we're all a hive mind. Okay. The players have shown that, and they're like, oh, now I really love Gary. The players still loved Gary, but it was a missed opportunity.
It was a missed opportunity. And this, so while we're still on sort of like the beginning, the first episode thing, like the second thing that is immediately obvious is that Travis really like okay, I'm going to resist the urge to call this railroading because that's an overused term, and I don't think it like accurately describes what's happening. But he does not respond very well, or he does not encourage player input, and this is something that you notice from the very, very beginning. He doesn't seek it out. He doesn't, really like run with anything that the players are presenting. We talked before about, and this is one of, I think, the most important concepts in D&D, is generosity of play. And this is something that Matt Mercer is so good at, and Travis is really not. And it's so frustrating for me to listen to, because I can hear his brothers and his dad and his trying to like engage, trying to role play, trying to like find a way to interact, and being stymied again and again and again. And this has to do with, I think, Travis's over preparation for each episode.
Yeah. It seems like he's putting too much pressure on himself. And again, this is a common new dungeon master mistake, to make every session when your friends show up some wonderful experience with beginning, a climax, and an end. And the downside to that is that it all feels forced, and you never give your players the space to develop a motivation, the space to care about what's going on, the space to decide what they want their characters to do.
And yeah, so the first episode is pretty frustrating to listen to. There's about 1,000 NPCs. They all have really weird names. The players are not really given any opportunity to do anything, though they do immediately split up and go on individual adventures, which again is just like, and then, so we talked about how the magical school isn't like, it's actually a pretty like great idea. It's not actually a bad,
starting
it's not
point
actually
for a campaign. No,
it's not a bad starting point.
But
for
what should a
the,
magic school be about? Should it be about making your players take accounting classes, which is something that happens in the game? Or, listen, there's maybe not only one way to do this, but when I think of telling a story about people in a school, whether it's like more like a high school or a middle school, or like Harry Potter, or more like a college, like the Magicians, I think the story is probably going to be about personal growth, breaking the rules, and sort of like figuring out how to chart your own course. But it's not. Your conceit has to match what players want to accomplish.
Right. So let's take as an example Harry Potter. This is an easy one, right? There are other magical schools, actually a lot of really good magical school books and movies and TV shows and animes out there. There's actually about 1,000 of them. Many of them are quite good. But let's use Harry Potter as an example everyone knows, right? So the first book, just as an example, what happens when you arrive at school, right? In the first book, they arrive at school, and then immediately everyone gets sorting hatted. Everyone gets, phrenology into their
That's
house.
Right. There's little calipers in that little weird grinding wizard hat that sort of just dances on your head.
I mean, this is both good and bad, but the thing is, it's engaging, right? Immediately, there's like some drama, there's some tension. Second book, what is it? They take the flying car, they fly into the Whomping Willow, right? They do not immediately show up and go to class, right? It's not the first thing that happens. But in fucking Graduation, the entire first episode is not even they don't go to class. That's orientation. Like, they go and they meet their professors and they have lunch and then they take a tour of the school. I am so sorry. This is really boring. I don't think that like you have to like start with a whiz-bang fight to like grab your players' attention, but holy crap. Nobody, like, I'm sorry, I could hear the other McElroys losing interest as I was listening to this. This is just not how you should start an adventure. And there's two reasons for it. One, it's just not very interesting subject matter, but also it doesn't give the players a chance to do anything except listen.
Yeah, there's so much of, I would say, the first third of this this campaign that is the players listening to the Dungeon Master. And it's exhausting for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is, I'm sorry, so this is here's a specific piece of advice that you can draw from this, and we've mentioned this before, but like, if you as the DM are talking to yourself, you have fucked up.
Yeah.
This is one of my most, sometimes this will happen to me, right? I'll put NPCs in and suddenly,
like,
oh shit, I'm talking to myself. I got to fix this because nobody wants to hear you have a conversation with yourself. That's a lot of work for you. You've done something wrong.
It's so hard to do. No one can do it well, right?
Yeah.
You are not Smeagol and Gollum. It's so hard to switch, and it's just the most boring thing for your players. Make sure you write it on a sticky note and put it on the back of your screen if you have to. I have done that before. No NPCs talking to each other, right? Just it shouldn't happen.
You gotta have like a brief, like couple lines, but that's it. Like there should be no extended conversations, and this happens again and again and again and again with Travis. And no wonder, like, he finds it stressful. No wonder he's exhausted. But
it's the
like,
most exhausting thing you can do is to play two characters. It's like showing up at like a community theater and finding out that there's no understudy and someone's not there, and you're like, all right, you're playing Romeo and Juliet, and you're like, oh shit, it's a nightmare.
It's just not fun. It's not interesting. This is an easy mistake to get into. Just don't do it. And this happens throughout graduation. It just repeatedly.
Okay, I want to move on to something else because it relates to some Dungeon Master advice we have given before, right? Which is that you should, as a Dungeon Master, play to your strengths, right? And I think Travis McElroy also got that piece of advice. He knows his strengths are coming up with NPCs that he likes and some wacky situations and a world that is full of whimsy and wonder, but also drama, doing voices, etc., etc. He played to those strengths. And I think it shows maybe the limit of that advice because there's no one right way to play role-playing games. They're so diverse and so different, and every group of people is different, but there are some basics, right? Which is, that he is missing, which causes the playing to his strengths not to work as well, right? It still works, right?
And
they still have fun NPCs, but it's missing that foundation.
It's rule zero. Everyone, it's about having fun, right? Like, if you can do anything you want in Dungeons and Dragons, but if your players, if you're not having fun, if your players aren't having fun, what are you doing? Like, that's and one thing that is consistent throughout this, and I'm reading into it, I don't know the McElroys personally, whatever. From my perspective, it does not seem that they are having a lot of fun most of the time. There are moments when they are clearly having fun, but most of the time, Travis isn't having fun. His brothers aren't having fun. His dad isn't having fun. And that's that's not fun to listen to. That's not fun for them. And this is I think where Travis goes wrong, is he's so fixated on how things should go that he's not paying attention to the key aspect of this, which is playing a game and having fun with your family,
I am a man of constant sorrow. I've seen trouble all my day. I bid farewell to old Kentucky, the place where I was born and raised, the place where he was born and raised.
The thing that I think he's missing here, while he's playing to his strengths as a dungeon master, he's forgetting that he's not the only person at the table. And having listened to parts of other seasons of the Adventure Zone, the strength of his players is that if you listen to anything else, is that you just basically present the McElroys with a situation and they will riff on it and have fun for 30 minutes. And he's constantly having another NPC come in, telling them what they have to do, instead of just being like, well, here's a wacky school. How do you want to fuck shit up? Right. Mm-hmm. And that's not how maybe he wants to run a game, but those are his players' strengths.
Right. And that's the game they want to play. That's what they have fun doing. And again, I don't want to go too hard on him just yet, but the whole time, it really felt like the Travis McElroy show. Every time he's got he's got a DM PC problem, Matt. Yeah. And we've talked about DM PCs before, and the advice that we give is just don't do them. But Travis has not one, but half a dozen NPCs who are more powerful and more interesting and given tons of spotlight time over the actual players. This is a big time major no-no, and he does it again and again and again.
Right. From Althea to Rainier, there's just so many NPCs in this game. And so obviously if your concept for the campaign is in your school, you're going to have a lot of other students and villains and heroes and teachers. It makes sense. But I think some, I don't know, insane Reddit person kept track of the number of named NPCs in this, I guess, 35 session campaign. And it's in the 80s or 90s. It's a lot of things to keep track of. Not all of them are super important, but still, that's whoa, man.
And practically on like a scene to scene level, sometimes Travis will have a scene where there's a dozen like named NPCs there, and then he will like name them with the players and then discuss what they're doing. That's just, I don't like, it doesn't matter. You can't do that. It doesn't work. Find a way to like narrow the scope. It's just too much to keep track of for you, for them. It muddies everything up. The game is very busy.
Right.
Many of the like key scenes and events just feel like so much is going on because Travis has all of these NPCs with all of these like outlandish abilities and personalities, and it overshadows the players, but it's also just difficult to keep up.
Now, we said that let's see what our takeaway here is, what we can learn from this NPC problem. We've said before that, the key to building interesting NPCs is to give them interesting motivations to, without putting too much effort into it, build them out as fully fleshed out people with an internal mechanic or dialogue or personality or something like that. You want to know maybe what they want. I think this is like the flip side of this, in that every NPC is built like a cool player character that you meet and you're like, well, let me tell you my story, right? Remembering that the story's about your players, you can have NPCs be like fully realized characters, right? Without them having to be the protagonist. There's 80 protagonists in this game.
Right. Everybody's the main character. The thing is that...
And then the NPCs that work the best, I think, are the just completely despicable and evil sea captain, the Commodore. Because while he is a fully realized character, like, he exists to create conflict for the protagonist. And then Snippers the crab, because it's a one joke crab.
Right. And that's the thing, is like your NPCs, they're a great place to have actually like interesting non-fantasy hero characters. Sometimes a shopkeeper is just a shopkeeper. Sometimes a professor is just a professor and can have a fully realized life there. They don't have to also be a 10th level wizard. There's also
the motivation of your professor could be like, I just want to keep my job. All right.
Right. I'm
very
trying to get
happy
tenure.
here. Please
shopkeeper
leave me alone.
can be. Yeah. And that's the thing, is like D&D has a problem with this in general. Like, every stat block is like, actually, this person is secretly a 7th level fighter. This bartender has 12 levels of barbarian. So you don't have to do this. And you can just have, you can have very interesting NPCs who are just, I'm a professor. I'm a, Speaking of professors, speaking of teachers, I wanted to talk a little bit about the second episode too, because there was also a lot that happened there.
Sure, let's go with a concrete example that hopefully can have a good lesson from it.
So, two things happen, I think, that are concrete things not to do and to learn from the second episode. And the first thing is, the players actually go to class. This, I think, is a mistake for Dungeons and Dragons. There are maybe game systems that could make this interesting.
Absolutely, there are, right?
But it is not Dungeons and Dragons, and this is a broader critique that will. But I'm sure that you've guessed it. One of my criticisms is I do not think that this game should have been run in D&D 5th edition. But regardless, this was a mistake. Travis should have just said, "You go to class. After class, blah
right.
blah 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 blah."
If there's a game system where you have a mechanic that's like, what's your goal for the class? Like, you have a playbook or a character sheet in front of you that's like, well, I want to like impress my peers. I want to be the clown. I want to impress my teacher, right? I want to cheat. There's a role for
right.
that. You can do all those things in Dungeons & Dragons, but they're going to take a very, very long time, right? If you get to the point where you're like running a daily activity in your game, you've gone too deep. Pull yourself back. You just hand wave that. But a big part of the problem here is that they take 2 classes or 3 classes, I forget. One of them is blame taking. Again, funny bit. They're sidekicks. It's a funny bit, yes.
But it ends up being really boring because they drag the bit out way too long. And Travis invents and I know there's no like rule for this, but like he invents a new rule or a new skill for blame taking. And he does this later when they play a magical game of dodgeball, which frankly, this was the most bored I ever was listening. I got so just disinterested during this game of human shield practice, where again, Travis had invented some homebrewed some rules for how to play this. If you're having to like wrangle the 5th edition rule set to like make your concept work, more than just like a little bit, you are using you're using the wrong system.
All right.
And this was, I think, the most important lesson from the whole campaign, but especially like it's immediately obvious from the beginning that this is the wrong system.
The going to class and the magical dodgeball game, I think, are two great examples of two things you want to avoid doing as a dungeon master, right? And it works something like this, is in both of those, at least it's incredibly, I can't be in Travis McElroy's mind, but it seems incredibly obvious to me that he wrote the magical dodgeball scene. And he's like, the players are then going to feel like, oh man, being a sidekick is really shitty work. I got to practice my blame taking and getting hit with things. Or the like going to a class. Oh man, going to accounting class is really boring, but it's important, right? I have already decided as a dungeon master how the players are going to feel and what the outcome of this is going to be. And everyone is just along for the ride. And the feelings they're going to feel are, I've also written them down as frustration and embarrassment and boredom. And it really doesn't matter what the feelings could be positive emotions. You cannot create a situation as a dungeon master where you set something up for this is how your players are going to feel and react.
And the characters, we haven't talked about it all because this is mostly about DMing, but each of the player characters don't really want to be sidekicks because of course they don't. One of them is a failed hero. The other two have their own motivations, but they could have just easily created one who's like, yeah, I'm so excited to be a sidekick. I cannot wait to step in front of a hero and
Argo
take a magic
was
missile.
kind of like that. He had a different motivation, but yeah.
Argo was, in my opinion, far and away the best character. But more on that later.
Right. A way to fix this is you say, okay, your next assignment is some field research. You've got to follow some heroes around and make sure they don't die or something. The heroes turn out to be really incompetent. Who knows what can happen? Maybe they let the heroes die. Maybe they learn how to be good sidekicks. Maybe they feel like they like it. Maybe they steal some gold on the side. Maybe they do have that feeling of resentment. Right. And then later on that sets up some sort of catharsis. Right. You don't know, though, as the dungeon master.
Right.
Right.
You don't just assume. Also in this episode, and this is related to something I said sooner, but this is a very precise example of it. They go to accounting class, which again, it's funny. I think this is a good joke. I like it.
This joke
but
would
then
work
the joke
in a
is ruined.
Cartoon show or something like that, right?
Yes.
You set it up, but not in a role-playing game.
The joke is ruined because this is also this is an SNL problem. This is the main thing that this does wrong is it takes a joke and then it just drags it out until it's no longer funny. But the first thing that happens in an accounting class is the pompous owl teacher comes in and it talks for 5 minutes about actually about accounting.
This is so much work.
Travis
Insane
is
amount of
giving
work.
a 5 amount why would you do this to yourself, Travis? Nobody wants it. I have been known to give a little monologue, but I keep it to 30 seconds a minute, and I make sure that it comes midway through the campaign and it is earned because I just this
a lot of work.
Every time you guys hear me getting really frustrated, it's because I was slammed to a halt listening because I like D&D. I like listening to it. I'm interested. And just every time something Travis would do one of these things, I was just yanked out of the game. And it's so frustrating.
Now, here's a more specific case of this whole problem of I've prepped an accounting class and I've already written out what the punchline of the joke is. I think more often than not. Now, listen. You can be a funny DM for some players who don't consider themselves funny people. It works great. However, I would say in general, the dungeon master is more often going to be the there needs to be a gender neutral term for it, but I can't think of one. The straight man,
guy, the straight person,
the straight person in a comedy duo between you
that's correct.
and your players. And so instead of writing an accounting class or a magical game of dodgeball where the punchline, oh, this class is boring, or your sidekicks are have to eat shit, is already written. You create the situation, and especially when you have players who are very, very funny people, you let them make jokes. You don't get to make the jokes, right? You get to set up the situations. You say, I need a place. We're in a gas station. All right, you just give it the players you're in a gas station, and you go with it.
And the thing is, one of the greatest joys I have, I'm a pretty funny DM, but one of the greatest joys I have is presenting like ridiculous or like overly like serious characters and letting the players stunt on them. That's fun for me.
The NPCs, that's how if they're named to, like, Higglemoss, Figglemoss, and Gary the Gargoyle, and Phoebo the... Yeah, it's like, all right, you've already done the joke. There's no chance to up the ante on how ridiculous these characters. Here's an example, right? When in the original The Adventure Zone campaign, with a different dungeon master running Lost Mines of Phandelver, they run into that boring paladin NPC and that like maybe immediately dies, and the players immediately call him Barry Blue Jeans. I don't know why that's funny. I don't know if that's a reference to something. I just laughed every time they called him Barry Blue Jeans. And when the character's name is already Hieronymus Wigglestaff, like it's just you let your players do the stunting, at least some of the time.
And like there are a lot. I think this is so warning here. I think this is we should transition to like broader discussion of Travis's DMing.
I have one other big point, but I'm totally with you. Yeah, you can't name your groundskeeper Groundsy. Let your players call him Groundsy, and then all of a sudden you've made it a funny thing as opposed to a cringe thing.
Right. And what Matt said is right. Is like there's funny players. Let them be funny. Like there are parts where I laughed my ass off. There's one, and this is a throwaway joke, but like Fitzroy went to somebody Knight's night school. It's fucking funny. It's a funny joke. It's a good joke. Every time he says it, I laugh. When like after that obnoxious 5-minute monologue, the Furbolg like discusses capitalism with the owl at length, and it's like a long, exhausting conversation, but it's hilarious because of it. Like there are funny jokes in this. There are funny players.
An example where the dungeon master was being the straight person in the comedy duo and letting this I forget who plays the Furbolg, Justin or something, stunt on him.
Justin
with
is
his
the Furbolg,
ridiculous
and Griffin
slow...
is Fitzroy. I don't remember. Yeah.
They all sound very similar except for Griffin. So I had a trouble at first with that, but they are genetically they share 50% of their DNA. So it's not.
So what's your final thing before we get into like big picture?
Here's
stuff?
the big thing that if you are one of the hundreds of thousands of people who listen to TAZ Graduation, but you also want to be a better DM and learn something from it, is on a larger scale. Sometime through this campaign, Travis McElroy, the dungeon master, decided that the big villain, is going to be a order chaos, maybe one person, maybe two people, god that is unhappy with the amount of murder and warfare and wants to start a big war. He gives the player, or they give the players, a giant ticking time clock of a lot of time. And the players have immediately come to the conclusion that a giant chaos war of the whole world is going to be bad. Lots of people are going to die. They don't like this. And basically, throughout the entire season, they've been eating shit, as like sidekicks, and they like do stuff for the magic school or the hero school, and they get their magic items taken away. And that's another thing. It's like if you're going to take your players' magic items away that they earn, tell them that someone's going to try and do that so they can have the opportunity to try and get around it and actually feel even better. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted. The big final battle. It's between an epic fate of the multiverse, order and chaos, like the timescape, everything's bound up in this. And the players start coming up with interesting solutions. They're like, you know what? This is a problem. I didn't really think it was a problem, but you told us it's kind of a problem. The whole problem with the Heroic Oversight Guild and heroes versus villains. And, this is all in the name of commerce. We're going to overthrow capitalism, right? They sort of like come to this conclusion on their own. And Travis lets them explore this plot a little bit, but then immediately, and then like in 20 different times, you can tell the players are trying to find another way to do this, forces them back to leading giant armies, leading a giant battle against this sort of weirdly motivated villain that they don't really care about.
Which only shows up at the very, very end of the arc.
Here's the interesting thing is the players have come up with a solution that they want to do to solve your problem. This god wants to invade the world and start a battle because they like murder. Fine, whatever. They've come up with a system that would fix this problem, basically destroying this world's capitalism and the hero-villain system. And this should have been a point where the Dungeon Master said, you know what? I've done a lot of prep for this cool final battle. And, okay, sure, it was a cool final battle. But it is not as cool as letting your players overthrow a system that they've been eating shit from the entire campaign. And they actually cared about. This is like towards the end of the arc, towards the end of the campaign. And the players hit like a new low point where they're like, I just want to take... I'm just going to take a nap. Why don't we leave? Why don't we leave this continent? Why don't we get on a ship and get out of here? Like, they're sort of saying it tongue in cheek, but like, I think the actual players at the table felt that. When your players come up with a solution, let them do that solution, even if it's not the one you've prepared. Even if you need to say, we need to take 2 weeks off, and before we leave here today, tell me what your vague plans are, right? And I'm going to do some more prep because this is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quickly about the final battle, I didn't like it. I thought it was dumb. And some people did like it. In their recap, Travis and some others talked about how they liked it. That being said,
you could tell it was one of those over-prepped things. So many person hours went into this. And it wasn't as good as just listening to your players and following them.
Practically, don't make up mass combat rules at the very end of your campaign. Don't give your players new character sheets at the very last episode. Also, practically, I've done this, but you only get to culminate a campaign in fighting, literal, embodiment of order and chaos one time. So, be sparing. The big galaxy-spanning villains are great, but you can only do that so many times before it starts to get kind of dull. So I wouldn't.
When your players are presented with a problem, which is a demon war invasion, and they come up with other ways to solve it, don't have an NPC show up and tell them, no, don't do it like that. No, that's actually not going to work. Okay, we'll try some. And then someone else shows up. No, you can't do it like that. All right, you did some things, but we're still going to have this final battle anyway, right? Not every campaign needs to end with an epic fate of the multiverse fight, right? The players changing the system that has screwed them over personally will be a billion times more satisfying.
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's a lot to learn from that.
Yeah.
I really do think.
And I'm sorry we were so negative about it. But there's so many positives you can take away from the things that were done wrong here.
Right. I do think that if you haven't listened to it and you want to be a better DM, listen to the first episode of Graduation. Pay attention to how the players are responding, and I think there's a lot to learn. Yeah. So this is the part of the podcast where I know we weren't super positive before, but where we're going to talk directly about Travis McElroy and about the Adventure Zone and some things that I have substantive criticisms of. So if you're a fan, continue being a fan. Stop listening, but it's going to get saltier from here on.
Saltier from here on out. And listen, we should say that running an actual play for other people is not something we have done. It is very different than your own game. But I feel like we do have a leg to stand on in our critique, in that we know how to dungeon master, and we can see when you make mistakes that apply to all games, right? You as the dungeon master, when your player kills the villain they've been working on, defining their character on, don't tell them how to feel. Don't say, oh, you stabbed that villain that killed your mother. You feel great. Let the player do that. Like, these are critiques we can make. So,
yeah. Okay, so speaking of, let's actually start there, Matt. So this is an actual play podcast, and like Matt said, we don't run our own actual plays. We have DM'd a lot. I think we're pretty okay at it, but I understand there's different challenges and responsibilities. I get that it's different, but that being said, when I started listening to this, I assumed that Travis had just sort of thrown his players into this, and I without any, but he mentions in the middle of the first episode and in the recap that he spent 7 months prepping for this, and that he had discussed it at length with his family before beginning. And the fact that everybody was still on their back foot was absolutely bewildering to me. And then later in both of those episodes, he mentions that he received direct dungeon master tutoring from Matt Mercer, from Chris Perkins, from a bunch of huge names in the industry. So the reason why I feel comfortable criticizing Travis McElroy and the Adventure Zone in general is because he has no excuse. They have been playing D&D for 7 years. I know that DMing is hard. I surely do. But he had plenty of time to prep. He had plenty of time to learn from both his family who DM'd and from other DMs. And he, frankly, in my opinion, chose not to. Yeah. This was a deliberate decision that he made to just ignore that advice. Because I know that Matt Mercer knows how to DM.
Yeah, here's the thing that I think you shouldn't take away from graduation is that dungeon mastering is so hard that only the certain type of people, only a Griffin McElroy can do it, and a Travis McElroy can't. No, he was so close to this being maybe not the greatest campaign of all time, but one in which everyone had fun. There were just little things that he had to change, all the things that we mentioned, and it would have been fine. So I think the takeaway here is when your players, or if you're talking to your friends who are also dungeon masters, your friends may not be Matt Mercer and Chris Perkins, but just listen to what they're saying to you.
Right. And listen to, this is what I said at the beginning, listen to other, actual plays. You don't have to listen to the whole thing. Listen to an episode or two. And just, take away, it helps demystify it. But, this is very frustrating to me because from listening to their, you should also listen to, if you're interested in getting better, from the Adventure Zone,
The Adventure Zone. Which, would make recap. This episode the Adventure Zone.
The Adventures.
Oh, God.
Anyway, from the recap, they make it sound like DMing is this impossible task, and yes, it is hard, and it's not for everybody, and a lot of people prefer being a player. It's not as hard as they're making it sound, and this is very frustrating to me. They make it sound like it's impossible to DM, it can't be done. No, it is not actually that hard. In fact, if you're good at it,
it was easier than what Travis did.
If you're good at it, you can let your players do a lot of the work, and this is why it's so hard for Travis, is he doesn't let his players do anything.
Right. He is basically playing a game, right, is fun. It's maybe even art with your friends, right? But it's also takes your energy, right? It takes life force to create something, to voice an NPC, to come up with, to do the math in your head, to do rulings. And if you listen to this show, you can feel Travis McElroy doing 90% of that energy when all he has to do is step back a bit, and everyone would be less exhausted.
Well, and I know that it's been a hard year, and we're all burned out, me included. But the other thing is, again, I know that not everybody knows how to improvise, but this is a group of people that have a really good relationship with each other. They're on another podcast where much of what they do is literally
just
improvisation.
Yes and each other.
And yet, for some reason, all of them, but like especially Travis are like, oh, I can't like just let things happen. This is a Dungeons and Dragons game, which is insane.
There's no adventuring here. This is a Dungeons and Dragons game.
That's right. You know, and it's like just let it happen, man. Like let your players like don't like I every time something funny happened, it was unplanned, and I'm like, you know, you don't have to have an answer for everything. You can just say, okay, great. How do you go about that? And then the other thing is like, this isn't live. They can edit it. Like at any point, the McElroys can like in real life, you're like, time out. What are we going to do here? And like, they talk about how like off mic, they like told Travis, I don't know what we're supposed to be doing. But at like no point did he just, this is the thing. Listeners, friends, this is the thing. All right. So DMing is hard. DMing live is hard. The McElroys have a bunch of fans who are really savage. I get that. But this is their job. They make a lot of money off of this. And like, I'm not like an exceptional person. I can do this, a pretty good job, while having an actual job.
Yeah,
right? I can
we
find
are
time to
incredibly
be
average at basically every part of
we're
this
very
process.
ordinary DMs, you know, but we're, you know, people have fun in our games. And like this is never gonna like
Rob's
not like
turning into like the speaking of Taz, you're turning into the Tasmanian devil from
I'm like I'm trying to like be chill about this, but like
Rob's just spinning around. He's turned into a small tornado.
Yeah, the reason why I'm like hulking out about this is because like midway through their like recap episode, they're like, it's just so hard to get 4 people together to record once a week or twice a month. For these episodes are an hour long, folks, and I like about like threw my phone through a window. I was just, what the fuck are you doing, McElroys? This is
also
your job.
It's your job. Also, you get to like kill 2 birds with one stone. It's hanging out with your family. You got that taken care of. Like other people have to play D&D and then go like call their family on FaceTime.
Right. Like some of us have to do a job and like separately hang out with our family and still find time for Dungeons and Dragons. Like, I'm sorry this is such a burden for you. I'm sorry this is so hard. Like, this is what's so frustrating. I'm not jealous. I don't want the Adventure Zone. I don't want to make this money, but this is what a lot of people think D&D is. And I am a big stupid nerd who cares about Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games. And like a lot of people think that this is what it looks like. And it doesn't. It doesn't look like this. They are giving a bad, like people, it makes me furious, Matt. I'm losing my shit about this.
Yeah, I feel like there's an instinct to basically, if you do a bad job dungeon mastering, and we all will, that's the thing.
It'll happen.
I have played in games and run games. I've been a dungeon master for, 20 years now, right? I'm not that old, but I started very young, right?
Started very young.
And
at least 3 people separately, close friends of mine, have rage quit Matt's campaigns because
that's right.
they were going poorly.
Right. I've done shitty jobs and bad things.
And sorry to call you out, Matt. People have rage quit my campaigns too, but it happens.
It happens,
folks. It happens.
But the point is, it's not like it's so hard that no one else can do it. It's here's the specific way you fucked up, right? And can you learn from that, right?
And the thing is, the bar is very low for the McElroys. They have a built-in fan base. They're have to have
funny.
like a
They've practiced this for 7 years
like
now.
You know, frankly, a shit show campaign with no arc would be more fun and interesting than what they actually did. But like they seem to be concerned that if they didn't like have these meticulously planned like emotional beats and story like arcs and like character development, that people won't like it. But like that's better. Like just having fun with your friends is what most D&D podcasts are, and it would work just fine. And I wish that they would do that.
There's just so many poor decisions that I think, you know, everyone who wants to dungeon master, just, you know, trying to read some basic advice is fine. But the most important thing is like learning how to, I go back to all those really terrible mistakes I've made as a dungeon master. And it came from me getting caught up in something else and not reading, not listening, not just in the oral sense, but like not reading my players, right? Not noticing that this person is upset or confused about something. And this is just 36 hours of that, right? Not noticing that someone gets really actually mad, like when you take their powers away, right? Don't do that. Not noticing that your players are again and again trying to avoid your plot, and then not listening and responding to them, right?
Yeah, it's just like it's a basic. I mean, and okay, so like to be again, to be fair, like in the recap episode, Travis admits that he has, control issues, which is obviously the problem, is that he's not willing to like give control to his players. But being aware is just step one. There's a great line in the Sad Horse show, BoJack Horseman, where somebody says to him, it's not enough to admit you're an asshole. You have to do something about it, right? And so like this is a problem that Travis has, is he's like, okay, I did these things that are bad, and then he does nothing to change, right? He acknowledges his failures, but then just keeps making them. And it's just
I mean, there's something about, and other more thoughtful people have talked about this more than us. There's a great article that we should probably include a link to by Gita Jackson in Vice.
That's on Vice. Yeah,
like,
it's a really good
it's
article.
Something
it's
like
much more
everyone
thoughtful,
loves the McElroys, everyone hates the McElroys.
It's much more generous than we're being.
Yeah, and I think that's probably fair. We're just assholes.
We're focused on one thing.
Gita
here,
is a good journalist. So, and
right.
it seems like the McElroys have built up a culture of, in some ways, responding to criticism in certain aspects, but never really taking some of it to heart. And maybe Travis is just sort of a victim of that success. I don't know. He's a guy who's got real. Trying to think of who Travis McElroy, and I never really wanted to get to know this person as well as I did through listening to him Dungeon Master for a lot of hours. He has real Johnny Sun energy. I don't know if you know who Johnny Sun is, but
this is one of my major criticisms, and one of the like big like McElroy brand things is no bummers, and
that's right.
It's just
talks about this in her article.
It's good vibes only, which like I get it. People want to listen to a thing that makes them feel good, but quite frankly, I think this is actually a pretty bad like policy.
I can't believe
think
you would have an advice show where you're like, don't ask us serious problems. I'm like, oh God, okay, well, okay.
and I think that like no bummers in itself can end up being a pretty big fucking bummer.
Right.
It like prevents you from ever like acknowledging mistakes or ever really like grappling with any like real issues, which doesn't have to like be a big deal. It can come and go, and then you get better and stronger for it. But like this whole like no bummers, good vibes only, like positive, wholesome, woke ally to the max thing.
The McElroys, does this
do.
make sense to you, Rob? The McElroys remind me of like good center left Mormons, but not Mormons. They've got like this Mormon-esque energy. No offense to any of our Mormon listeners. They've been some of the nicest people in my life. But something reminds me of. It's like, they're family. They all love each other. Everyone, when you hang out with them as a family, you're like, man, I wish I was part of this family, right?
They do say bad words and they make sex jokes.
Yeah, they make it.
But there's
Mormons
something
who cuss.
But there's something very sanitized
Which is kind of
about
fun,
it.
right? I like the idea of
this is I think what Matt is getting at, and the thing that I don't like is there's a false veneer of wholesomeness and goodness and friendliness that strikes me as false. I don't like it. It rubs me the wrong way.
Well,
a lot of people like it, not for me.
It's okay. Like for us, we live in the dirt. Rob and I are little worms.
That's right.
We're little
Matt and I are grimy filth
people.
Sewer men.
Throw rotten tomatoes at. Yes. And we're disgusting. We love it down here. And, anyone should criticize, and they have.
Dirtbag dungeon masters.
Should criticize us for everything and anything we do. But with something at the tier of the McElroys, it seems like they have a little card with two sides that they hold up on their in front of them. It's like, this is a professional, media empire, and then they flip it around. And it's like, no, actually, this is a family just hanging out and playing D&D, and you're not sure whichever side works best for the situation.
And again, to be fair, Travis received a great deal of criticism from his fans during this season.
Yeah,
and he admits
people
that halfway
were
through he wanted to
harsh
quit
to him.
And so
we are
it's not
too.
like, and we are too. And I know, again, no one cares. No one listens to us. They could stomp us like bugs if they wanted to. But, it's not like he hasn't heard this. And he did, again, he heard the criticism. He responded to it, but he totally failed to, internalize it, do anything with it. And this is the big problem, is that they'll say, oh, we're listening. Oh, we hear you. And then do nothing about it. And this is where Matt's two-sided card comes in. They'll profit immensely from their family game, but then as soon as someone criticizes them, they're like, oh, well, we're just blah blah blah. And I guess the unprofessionalism, the bar is low, right? You to be a D&D podcast, you don't really actually have to be a professional, but they've done almost no prep. They don't even know the rules. They barely know the rules of 5th edition, which is just
that's fine though.
That's fine, but play a different game. Just there are games where you don't even need to know the rules. I don't.
Here's an
doing,
example
McElroys?
of where the this I think comes from. In one of the early episodes, we meet an NPC called Rainier, who is a person who is introduced by the dungeon master as having a chronic illness, and therefore they are in a floating hover chair. And the NPC shows up, and the players are talking to him, and then the dungeon master Travis says, "Don't you," through the voice of this NPC in a wheelchair, Rainier says, "Don't you want to ask about the chair?" And I believe it's Griffin who says, "No, I thought that'd be rude." And then we get sidetracked into, okay, we've introduced a disabled character, but what's their character trait? Well, they're disabled. It's the attempt of I listened to you. We want to have more diverse characters. Not like that, bro.
No, and the thing is, he clearly, and this, I wasn't going to bring this up. I had it written down, but then we were talking about other things. But I'm glad we did. And Gita mentions it in her article, but, it feels like he wanted credit. Yeah. The thing is, it's cool to put a person in a hover chair in your game, but if your players notice it and they don't comment on it, that's fine. I put a lot of, trans and non-binary characters in my games, and if they're not oh, wow, that person uses they them pronouns, I'm I don't care, it's fine. That's the point, is they're there. If that, I hope that makes people feel welcome and included.
And reflects the diversity of our world.
Right.
You don't get a cookie for it. You don't get a cookie for that.
And I don't want a fucking
Sorry,
cookie. But
there's no cookie for it.
Travis wanted
real and good, but you don't get
Travis
anything.
Clearly wanted praise, good for you, man, for putting in a person in a wheelchair. You're so cool.
It felt like listening to that the next day he expected there to be 1,000 fan arts done of this character in a wheelchair, and a bunch of people saying, "Travis, you did it. You get the biggest cookie of all from the internet for being the best center left liberal on Twitter."
And there's just a bunch of moments like that, and it. So what do we? I don't know what we want to take my major and here's one more thing.
I have to call this episode "Yes Bummers." I think.
Yes.
Because we got some bummer. This is kind of a bummer. I need to pull myself out of this bummer, because I feel like I did learn a lot in the worst way possible from.
I got one last bummer before we try to do a big picture, and then
hit me below the belt
again.
Go for it.
Again, sometimes, and I try to poke through all the fan media and see what people are saying, and in the Reddit sometimes they're yeah, how dare you criticize them for a free podcast? I'm okay, it's free, but there are ads, and one of the ads was for personal loans. Like one of the fucking McElroys was advertising on one of the recent, I forget like the podcast, but like a personal loan service called, what the fuck is it? Some like app to like get a loan, and
you
these
can
loans
put
are
a
fucking
personal
ads.
loan on an app. It's still pure evil. You might as well be
I
buying
mean,
something
these are loans with like 25% like interest rates. These are absolutely they're this is the kind of thing that you would be executed for in Europe, for 1,000 years, because it was usurious and it was literally like against every law on the continent. And yet the McElroys are like, hey, you wanna, a personal loan? Here's this service. I mean, it's bad enough that they're advertising Stitch Fix. Whatever. Who cares?
What is
honestly,
Stitch Fix? Sorry, I was trying to play along with your thing.
It's they send you clothes and then you try them on. It's
not
a
what I
personal styling service.
I'm sorry.
It's fine.
I thought
it's whatever.
Would be a tailoring service or something.
No, people need to make money. I don't care that they make money, but like that. Like you have a responsibility. Like, you have so many listeners. You don't have to be perfect, but like I don't know. I just want better from them, and I don't like that they like shield themselves from very responsible criticism. And I mentioned this already, but I just like lost my shit when they were talking about how they just couldn't find the time to record these podcasts. Like, this is your job. I'm so sorry that this is so hard for you, but like, don't do it then. Let your listeners give their money to one of the many better like podcasts. Like, point them in a direction of any of the other actual plays with real diversity or better DMs. It's just so infuriating. This is gonna sound like sour grapes, and sure, whatever. This is the same thing that we got when we bitched about Penny Arcade, which we're still right about, and I have no regrets. But it's not sour grapes. I care about the hobby. I care about Dungeons and Dragons, and I don't like that so much air is being taken up by these, fuck offs. Just try a little harder, guys. I don't know. I'm losing the thread.
Yeah,
Matt,
you're losing the thread. Listen, I would say,
let's get out of the bummer zone.
Get out of the bummer zone.
Bummer zone.
We did the bummer zone so that they don't have to. Listen, there are many other. The first bit of the Adventure Zone is actually kind of funny and heartwarming and pretty good, and it's kind of maybe a good introduction to Dungeons and Dragons, because
it's not a bad one.
You can tell Griffin doesn't know what he's doing. He hasn't done a ton of prep, and it's still lots of fun. And people are like, "Oh, Griffin makes it seem so easy." It's because it can be easy, right?
If you just let your players do it. And the thing is like the Adventure Zone, it's a really good example of it's my favorite example when it's working well of a tongue-in-cheek, fun D&D podcast that doesn't take itself too seriously. Like, all podcasts have jokes. Critical Role's got tons of jokes, but they're still in character. They're still like, it's still like a, real fantasy world. There's a bunch of dumb puns, and like they talk about Shia LaBeouf, and like, they throw in like, they're not like hardcore role playing. They're just having a good time. I think that's how I run a lot of my games. It can be kind of hard to draw the line, like, and players can like get too carried away making jokes. This is the perfect example of like a tongue-in-cheek D&D campaign, which still like sticks to the rough story beats. Again, when it's working, and I think it's great for that. It's just that so much of it is not that, and especially Graduation.
Yeah, I would say let's end with some recommendations for some actual plays that are not like Critical Role, that are not the Adventure Zone, that are also very good. I'll start us, Rob. I'm going to say one that helped me. So I've played in Masks before, but as I was prepping it for my students, I was like, I should listen to some more Masks on the way. And I found Critical Bits. This is by Joel Ruiz, Shelby Lee, Paul Byron, and Shannon Strucci. It is, a great Masks adventure. It is funny. It is emotional. It is everything Masks should be. Listen to Critical Bits. It's very good. I got maybe one more recommendation, but if you have one, hit me.
I got a couple. I have not listened to much, but I think it's really interesting and good, and I like Friends of the Table. Friends of the Table is
so good.
but it's an actual play podcast, and they do a lot of really interesting things. There's a lot of really interesting world building and storytelling, and I think it's very, very different from the Adventure Zone and from Critical Role, but it's I think it's a really, really interesting podcast to listen to for learning how to just being exposed to different styles of play, I think.
Yeah. I would also say you really can't go wrong with any of the podcasts on the One Shot Podcast Network. James D'Amato, I think, is the main dungeon master / lead. There's a ton of one shots, as the name tells you, and interesting campaign. There's a bunch of interesting campaigns. The two I've started are the Broadswords and Skyjacks. Both are very.
The one I was going to recommend was the Broadswords. I like the Broadswords a lot. I listened to the Daniel Kwan recommended that we listen and follow them, and I've been listening to some since then, and I really like the Broadswords. They have a really great rapport, fun to listen to.
That's great.
Yeah. So yeah, that's our take on the Adventure Zone.
Here's your diploma. I think everyone has picked up a lot of student debt from listening to this. We certainly have. But here's the thing about role playing games. Here's a no bummers ending in that role playing games on the stage of media and art and things you can do are still in their relative infancy, and like watching Birdemic or Manos, The Hands of Fate, or something like that. Listening to a bad role-playing game or being in a bad role-playing game, at least one where you don't get hurt, it's just not very fun, can be a learning experience, because you're like, oh, I see what they did wrong here. They had an establishing shot that was 20 minutes long. The birds were CGI and they attacked them with coat hangers. I see what went wrong here. That's something I can avoid. And at least for me, listening to, honestly, this train wreck of misery was with moments of inspiration and levity and fun and true feeling, did teach me, oh yeah, these are things that I really don't want to do at my table. And I've done them in the past, and this is a great reminder not to do them again.
And this was it was very instructive for me as Travis was making these mistakes. I was feeling sympathetic pangs because I was like, oh man, I did this exact same thing.
Now I know how my players felt.
And, I got frustrated because these guys are our age or older. They've been playing for a long time. They've had plenty of opportunities to learn this just as we have. But it was very instructive for me. It was a reminder for all of my failures as a person, as a DM, that I have some, I can still learn and grow, and I have some things that I've done right. And, this is a good time to bring up, Matt mentioned at the beginning, we don't do actual plays, so it's very easy for us to criticize, but we do want to. And I think we're going to, as part of our segue, our new Patreon, we're probably going to do some bonuses where we do actual plays. And maybe it'll turn out that we suck at it and we should shut up and all of our criticisms are unfair. But, I'm looking forward to putting my money where my mouth is here. But it was very, I learned a lot from this. I learned a lot from listening to the graduation. I took a lot of notes. And I told you, this is, I think, part of why. Listen, let me do a McElroy and get real with you here, folks.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm your best friend. The internet's best friend is me, Rob. Not Travis McElroy. I'm your real best friend.
And I, the internet, have a real relationship with you. We actually are friends.
Well, and actually, sorry, I should have mentioned this sooner before I get to my getting real take. This is a parasocial relationship, right? People like the McElroys because they feel like they're friends or part of the family. And you know what? I know that Many of you have a parasocial relationship with us. I have a parasocial relationship with many of the podcasts I listen to. It's okay. You just need to be realistic about it. I have no illusions about why people like them. This is, I feel very strongly about, you've heard me get like worked up. Unlike Matt, I do not have control of my emotions. I am he has cold Polish blood. My family is Italian. I cannot, I cannot maintain
it's the Mediterranean climes. It's
it's
all the fiery olive oil in there. It's
Celto-Iberian skull shape makes me prone to outbursts, but like I really feel very strongly about Dungeons and Dragons. I like this game. I want people to like get into it and enjoy it. I think that it can be really good for many of the things that I struggled with as a person. Like I was a shy person. I lacked confidence. I was not good at speaking extemporaneously. And over a couple of decades of DMing, I've gotten very, very good at those things. And I also think it's a great way to like interact with people and make friendships. And like I have real strong feelings for my long running players, and I have very fond memories of the games that I've run. And so when I see somebody who is at the vanguard of Dungeons and Dragons, of role-playing games, fail, in my opinion, to like really like represent it or care for it or treat it with the, I think, respect it deserves, I get very frustrated. I get very worked up. And so
I think the real failures here, right, as we mentioned before, not listening, right, and not correcting, right? But the other failure is the one that like came after the show, of just sort of admitting, well, I think Travis's sort of point is like, oh, I just can't do this. It's like, well, no, you could if you went back and listened to this and made some changes. Your first campaign's never going to be the best thing. Sorry. But yeah, you can do this. Even Travis McElroy can do this. That was, I think, the most harmful thing said during this campaign.
Yeah, and we talked about this, but like one of our things is like, anybody can DM. It really, yes, it's hard. Not everyone's going to be great at it, but it is something that anybody can do. And it is more work than being a player. Yeah. It is not too much work, right? You may need more breaks. You may need time to prep, but you can take that. The McElroys can do it. They don't have a regular publishing schedule. They can take breaks, and they can, prep, and they can do what they need to do. It's fine. You again, even if you're literally doing a live show, it's okay. You can take a time out, you can take a break, you can figure out where you're going, you can waffle. We have other episodes where we've given tons of advice on how to like buy yourself time if your players have thrown you like a curveball. It is not impossible to do this, and
pocket sand, and then go back to your notes.
Like Matt, I'm just so frustrated that this makes it seem like DMing is this impossible, arduous task, when that's not the case at all.
Yeah. Anyway,
so
live, learn, love the McElroys. We've graduated.
So, this is one of our longest podcasts ever. But I hope that you found it interesting and instructive. I hope you're not too mad at us. If there is anything that you want us to respond to that we didn't, write us at dmofnone@gmail.com. Add us on Twitter at dmofnone.
Also, we're not the ultimate critics of a Dungeons and Dragons game or of dungeon mastering. I'm sure there's something that we probably said here that is very, very wrong. But I think it's important that at least when people do shows for money, right, and entertainment, you criticize them, because this is how people learn to dungeon master better.
Right.
So if you have a criticism of us or of graduation that we didn't get to, let us know what it is.
Let us know. And as we mentioned,
even if it's a bummer.
Sorry about the bummers, everybody. We did launch our Patreon, which is at patreon.com/Dungeon Master of None. Check it out. For $5, you get right now, this very moment, the Warlord, the Advanced Artificer, 2 of our one-shots, or 2 of our adventures, the Celestial Job and Rumblings. We will have at least 1 bonus episode a month and 1 piece of homebrew, possibly more, depending on how excited we get. But check it out, $5 a month. also, because we now accept money, you can criticize us. Not that it has stopped any of you up to this point, but feel free to criticize us more.
Even more,
especially
please.
If you give us money. Yeah. So, again, I hope that this wasn't too negative. I'm sorry about the bummers. I do think there's a lot to learn from this, and I think it was important to talk about.
Bummers are how we learn. And if you have no bummers, you have no learning. I'm sorry.
That's right.
I feel like one of the best ways this fucking stupid podcast has got better is when someone has given us like a real serious piece of criticism that made me feel a little bad. It was good for me. I'm an adult. I can feel bad about things sometimes and learn.
How you grow. It's how you
goddamn,
get
that
better.
Wasn't good. Yeah, okay. Now I can.
When one of my players is like, Rob, I didn't like that session. That was not good. I'm like, okay, I hear that. I want you to have fun because that's important to me. I want to be good at this.
Yes, bummers.
Yes, bummers.
All right, we got to get the fuck out of here, man.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe. Keep rolling them dice.
Give us bummers.